Hello, buddy. You're on the Somar channel. Enjoy watching. What do you swear you saw, but you have no proof? When I was a kid, I was chased by a cougar. My family was walking ahead of me, and I saw it watching me from a tree. I shouted to my parents, looked back, and it was gone. I was less than 10 years old then, and now I'm almost 40. And now, I don't even know if it was real. In 1995, I was sitting on a beach in Durban, South Africa, with a group of mates after a night of partying. The sun was just beginning to rise, and then a dolphin surfaced from the water. It stood silhouetted against the rising sun for less than a second, and then disappeared. No one else saw it, but the image is imprinted in my memory and will no doubt stay with me for the rest of my life. When I was 10, we had a 14-year-old German Shepherd who was very sick. At one point, I was home alone. My mother had gone to the neighbors to get a book or something. The dog came up, begged me to go outside with him, then started licking my hands, looked at me for a moment, and ran away, jumping over the fence. He never came back. He was such a loyal and good dog that no one still believes me and thinks he was stolen because he would never leave on his own. And I'm pretty sure he did because he didn't want us to see him die. He probably wanted to run off into the deep woods and retire there. I miss you, mate. I was living in a guest house in the backwoods of Washington State for a week at the time. One day I was sitting on the porch early one morning drinking coffee when suddenly I saw a young deer in the yard, about 20 meters away from me. I froze and stared at it. Then a rabbit ran up to me and they spotted each other. The rabbit jumped up to the deer and the deer cautiously put its nose up to the rabbit. The rabbit stood on its hind legs and they slowly brought their noses closer and closer together. Then they made contact and the deer jumped up. The rabbit ran a full circle around the deer and stopped. After that, they repeated the same thing. They did this about 3 times and then ran back into the woods together. The incident happened before the advent of mobile phones, which I am very happy about. This event was something for me and only for me, for which I am grateful. At 5 a.m. I went for a run. On the way, I stopped to pray at the statue in front of the church. There was an old woman standing there who was also praying. I stopped next to her and closed my eyes, and then I heard the old lady crying. I opened my eyes to check on her, and damn, she was nowhere to be found. I thought I was imagining her or something and continued running. Then I heard a sound from behind me. Turned around and there she was, looking at me. I ran as fast as I could. It was the most intense run of my life. I saw 2 foxes skating on the frozen pond as if on ice skates. My mom and my brother saw them too. We watched them for 10 minutes or more. Sometimes they glided on their hind legs, sometimes on all of them at once. But they were just playing together and getting a thrill out of gliding. I once saw a cat walk down the street to the zebra, stop, look around, cross the road, and then walk down the other side of the road in the same direction. Street smart cat. When I was a kid, I would sometimes get up in the middle of the night and go downstairs for a drink or a snack. On the way, I would pass a dark corridor that led to my dad's office. I was always scared to look down that corridor at night because I was afraid I would see a small child in there. I have no idea where that thought came from, except in my super rich imagination. Years later, my wife and kids and I came to visit and stayed in that house. My daughter slept in her father's study. As you may have guessed by now, one night I was going downstairs to get something to eat. And as I passed the hallway, I looked in and what did I see? My baby was standing there. I was scared to death. I was sitting with my brother's 1-year-old twins. At that point, both were saying a few words, but nothing like a sentence. Just, Mom, Daddy, cow, hello. At a point, one of the twins grabbed my phone off the floor and I asked for it back. He suddenly asked, "Do you want your phone back?" I said, "Yes, please," and he held it out to me. When I talk about this, no one believes me. At around 12 or 1 a.m., I was driving along a long stretch of road with only short grass and metal fences on either side. I saw a man in a suit with a suitcase walking in the opposite direction from me. Thinking how odd that was, I looked in the rearview mirror and poof, he was gone. He had disappeared. That said, there was nowhere for him to hide. I'm 99% sure I saw a ghost. When I was a child, my mother and I were driving in the car on the motorway. The sun was already rising. I was looking at the horizon line above the trees when suddenly I saw a meteorite clearly. It was of catastrophic size and was falling slowly from right to left, orange, burning with a plume. After about 5 seconds, it disappeared behind the tree line. Apparently, it was some sort of illusion, as it was absolutely gigantic and should have fucking destroyed everything. My mom didn't see it. I was having lunch, walking around downtown Des Moines, Suddenly, some homeless guy with a cigarette in his mouth and a stiff drawl attacking him ran up to two guys in business suits and asked them something. I couldn't make out what they said. I then saw the two businessmen grab the homeless man by his legs and lift him onto a rubbish bin. He then began to dribble into the opening of the tank, accompanied by some of the nastiest explosive noises I've ever heard. An incident happened a few years ago. My wife and I were moving across the country and stayed a couple of nights with her grandparents in Topeka, Kansas, which is in the far eastern part of the state. We left them after a few days of snowfall. The weather was a little cloudy, but no fog, and we drove across Kansas to Colorado, where we wanted to stay at my grandmother's house for a couple of days. Less than 8 kilometers outside of Topeka, we were engulfed by the thickest, densest fog I've ever seen in my life. There wasn't a single car on our side of the highway, and no one was coming the other way, and it was like that for hours. In the first 3 or 4 hours, maybe one car passed in the other direction, and all around there was just a thick, thick fog. At one point, we decided to pull over to the side of the road, not even to get petrol, but to get a snack and use the toilet. The lights were on at the petrol station, but there were no parked cars around it. We could see what was going on inside, but there were no people there. We watched the petrol station for about 10 to 15 minutes, but there was still no sign of life there. We ended up just leaving because it was super creepy. I can't express how empty it was all around. When we think of this place, we usually call it Silent Kansas, after the Silent Hill series of games, because there was nothing but thick fog and a bad vibe. We drove for really long hours through Kansas, and the fog didn't clear or abate, and we didn't encounter a single living thing. There were no signs about gas stations or restaurants, which I know there usually are. It was just empty nothingness in the fog. And then we crossed the Colorado border, and after about 3 kilometers, without even entering the mountain, we were at the same elevation as before entering Colorado. The fog disappeared. The sky was clear and blue, and there were lots of cars on the highway in both directions. My wife and I experienced this together, but we'll never be able to provide proof of our experience because it happened before the age of smartphones, and neither of us had the opportunity to take videos. All in all, it remains one of the scariest and most inexplicable experiences I've ever had. I saw a completely white owl in Brazil in the Atlantic forest, coming home at 3 a.m. I live near a closed forest area. The owl was sitting on the pavement. I stopped to take a picture of it, but it flew away. Perhaps it was an albino or she had leukemia. I never saw it again. In 2012, I was living in the Midwest near an Air Force base. I was delivering newspapers in the early mornings, trying to make some money. One day at 4 a.m., a drone showed up on my route. Not a small drone like we have today. The bastard was big and up in the air. I saw it through the sunroof of my car and heard a buzzing sound. He followed me for a few blocks. As I pulled up to my destination, I got out of the car to leave the mail on the porch, looked at him, and he flew away. It still scares me to this day. An incident happened at my workplace, on the railway. We were traveling along the main line at 70 kilometers per hour. It was the middle of the day, driving in the middle of a forest. Suddenly, I saw a big thing that jumped from one tree branch to another, going about 10 meters without touching anything. The thing was on all fours and muscular, kind of like a bear, but much larger, and its skin was flesh pink. When I saw this thing, I jumped up from my seat, and my engineer remained seated, looking at me as he spoke. I told him what I had seen, described this thing, expecting him not to believe me. However, to my surprise, he said that a fortnight ago, another guide he was working with had seen the same thing in the same area. There was no further news about it. I saw a woman in white on the side of the road. It happened around 2 in the morning in rural New Jersey. She was wearing a white floor-length dress. The other 2 passengers in the car did not see her. I turned around to look at her again, but saw nothing. As a kid, when I was about 12 years old, I was cycling without my phone. While riding over a bridge in the countryside, I saw something huge down by the riverbed. I stopped, got closer, and I swear I realized it was a 2-meter-long leech or worm or something. It was lying on the ground and moving slowly towards the river. I rushed home to get my phone to take a picture, but by the time I got back, that shit was gone. I still don't know what it was or where it went, but it was definitely there that day 10 years ago. Edit. If anything, the river itself is only 5 meters wide, and even less in some places. And it was Croatia, not some humid tropical country where such a thing could very realistically happen. It couldn't have been a snake, because firstly, we don't have big snakes here, and secondly, it didn't slither like a snake, but shrank and stretched like a worm does. That's the end of it. You can watch our other videos. Thanks for watching and don't forget to subscribe. Bye-bye.